Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, His church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Politics is kind of a unique thing. We don't all have sort of a obligation to know about engineering or know about different fields. We all have an obligation to know about politics because civic involvement is part of the social contract in this country. And so if we're going to be involved in politics, we need to educate ourselves on how politics operates. And that's a big hope that I have for the book, that even if, no matter where you stand on the president, that reading the book will help you understand how politics operates in a clearer way.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons, and this week I'm excited for this conversation because much of the United States is thinking about what it means to have a president in the White House and what is he going to think about issues and the complexities and how does faith play into any of these sorts of things. And yet we have somebody with us today who experienced this in the last White House. And so it's very informative as we think about this relationship between faith and politics. Now, for many of you, we understand this is very complicated and there's no easy answers. And it's always a difficult conversation to understand theologically. How does a Christian involve themselves in the state? How do we involve ourselves in politics, in the government, and yet retain our witness and retain the fact that our citizenship is ultimately part of the kingdom of God and we are just passing through? Well, Michael Weir, who served in the Obama White House, he was part of both of President Obama's campaigns to become elected, and then he served in the first term of the White House over 4 years in the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. And in that role, he actually did a lot to try to bring faith into the conversations and to invite people into the White House conversation who might normally have never had a seat in that space. And so his book, Reclaiming Hope, which launches this week, Lessons Learned in the Obama White House about the Future of Faith in America, is very telling. I was impressed. Publishers Weekly gave it a starred review, which is, in the publishing world, something to behold. It states that this book isn't just helpful in trying to give you some insight on what it was like to be in the White House, but it's actually very informative as we think about the next decade and what does it look like for faith to intermingle with politics? What's the appropriate ways to do that? So in the next few moments, just sit with me as I have this conversation with Michael Weir, and I think you're going to be not only gain insights, but you're also going to just be encouraged to hear about how faithfulness for this one leader has played out over the last 8 years. Well, Michael, it's so good to have you as part of the Q Podcast today. And you and I have been longtime friends, and it's just been fun to watch the journey that you've been on, both as a leader, who's served our country really, really well over many, many years, but now really as a voice of reason in a time politically where it seems like a lot of people have lost their reasonableness. And this is a pretty interesting week with the inauguration and everything starting to take place. I feel like Americans have gotten really tuned in to civics and how our country works and what takes place at the executive level. And that's something you've had this very personal opportunity to sit within as one of the youngest people to work in the White House. Welcome to the podcast. And man, how are you feeling this week with your new book out, inauguration happening? I mean, it's like a lot's happening for you and a lot's happening politically.
Yeah, I'm feeling great. It's an exciting time for our country. It's exciting to, after really working on this book for the last 2 or 3 years, and you know what this feels like to finally be able to share it with readers and not kind of feel like, you're just sitting with it. I'm just really excited for other folks to read it and for me to hear what folks think and for really my experiences and what I've learned over the last, decade to be shared and hopefully inform the church as we move forward.
Well, this is the last day of the Obama administration, and you have essentially, in your adult life, there's only been one president of the United States, and that's President Obama. That's about to change right now. And I guess, from your experience, Michael, I mean, the title of your book really captures so much of what I know of you, and it's called Reclaiming Hope. And the subline is Lessons Learned in the Obama White House about the Future of Faith in America. But as long as I've known you, you've been a person that's incredibly hopeful, who's always had the ability to really see around the corner and see that silver lining and capture the best of what's possible amongst Americans, amongst the relationship between people of faith and the government. A lot of people, though, are a bit pessimistic today about where this country's going or how things are changing. I mean, it's such a mix now. The country's so divided. Some are excited and thrilled about the direction of the country, and half of America is depressed. So tell us, what do you see that's hopeful about this next season of political engagement with any citizen of the United States and how they could have a positive outlook on where the future's headed?
Yeah, well, part of the reason why there's so much disappointment and despair is because we've allowed hope to be conflated with political outcomes. And so we've sort of imagined our future, our ultimate security being tied up in who gets elected. Now, I want to be clear, but obviously I've spent my life in politics. I think politics is important. It has concrete impacts on people and whether people live or die. So politics is serious business, but hope actually gives us a vision to see possibilities when others can't see them. Hope opens up vistas of possibility that allows us to enter into any time and be looking for what God is doing. And so there are a lot of reasons. There are a lot of things to hope for. The question I try and tackle in my book is, what do we hope in? And if our hope is not in the right place, then that's going to lead us down some wrong paths when we're thinking about our public engagement and even our personal lives.
Yeah, and I think your book captures that well, and I love the way in which, as a reader, you're able to come in and really experience what your life was like in the White House. I mean, and I got to see you in those early days, and one of the things I always appreciated, Michael, was especially in the first administration when you were working at the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. I remember convening a group of people that you and Joshua Dubois helped pull together that was really Christians who were working in every kind of area of culture, social issues. It could be the incarceration issue, working in mental health, working as church leaders focused on international challenges or injustices or helping those in need. And in a very bipartisan way, pulled people into the White House and said, how can we work together? How can we don't care if you voted for President Obama or not. We actually care about trying to get some things done. Kind of let us in a little bit on those first years in the White House and that perspective, and maybe some of the work you're most proud of as it relates to bringing people together to solve some common problems.
Yeah, well, like at the White House, that's not typically how it works. Typically, you bring the folks with willing to use their platform as political muscle to register voters and give political benefit to the politician. And so it skews the types of leaders that are lifted up and included in White House discussions and those who are not. And I saw that when I came in, and in my role leading evangelical outreach at the White House, I wanted to try and turn that ship a little bit. And so that meeting is a great example of an opportunity where the folks in that room were not going to be helpful to us in a re-election or in a electoral fight. But what they were leaders on the ground that were doing good, that were using their platforms and their organizations to actually serve people. And so I tell a story in the book about that meeting where Administrator Raj Shah, who was the head of the U.S. Agency for International Development, came in and talked to the leaders there about a program called Feed the Future, the federal government's effort to, in partnership with other countries and with international organizations, to combat global hunger. And he lays out this program, and the conversation turned to the CEO of one of the biggest evangelical international development ministries out there. And I was sort of, typically in these conversations, the CEO of a private NGO would respond to the government official and say, our organization could do it for cheaper. Our organization, we have less red tape than you big government bureaucrats. And instead, it was amazing. This leader who certainly could have, used talking points and kind of all that kind of stuff, said, you know what? I don't know how much it would cost my organization to do what you're talking about. All I know is that the problem is too big for either one of us to tackle on our own. And I'm grateful for the work that you're doing, and I'm going to support Feed the Future any way that I can. And it was just this beautiful moment of leaders from very different backgrounds, very different institutions, being able to look in the same direction toward a shared goal. And those moments happened often. That gave me great hope. So I had the opportunity to lead and help coordinate our work around an issue like adoption, where we were able to get the adoption tax credit made permanent, where we were able to shine a spotlight on special needs adoptions out of foster care, where for a few years we had the Secretary of Health and Human Services actually preside over adoption ceremonies of older or special needs youth, where she would just cry every year. And it was just such a special moment that got press and encouraged people to adopt. And then I also was able to lead some of our work combating human trafficking. And so we worked with International Justice Mission and the Passion Conference, and with so many leaders across the faith community and in the nonprofit sector to make significant new investments in combating human trafficking. And so it was an honor to work not just at the White House, but to be able to interact with and partner with religious people, not just religious leaders, but folks on the ground living out their faith, serving people in need. And I'll never forget those experiences.
Well, Michael, I think one of the things you made a practice of your office and your work was being out with people, with organizations, getting on the ground in different cities, meeting people, versus saying to everybody, hey, come to us, come see how we're thinking about it, what we're doing. A lot's changed in the White House. It used to be a place that could convene people pretty easily, and it still obviously does do that. But it's also a new day where people, especially younger people, might be just less interested in politics, less interested in making the trip, and you were willing to come out and say, hey, I want to see what's happening, see the people who are so busy getting the work done. They might not be able to sit around and talk about it or be in a think tank. So we're going to go see it, and we're going to go help them. And we're going to find connections and ways the government can use the great troves of data that we have access to, and connections and networks. And we're going to supply that so that we get more done for people. One question I know that a lot of people listening that hear of somebody like yourself who worked at the White House wonders is, what was President Obama like? When you take away the cameras, you take away behind the scenes, having these conversations, these meetings. I had the privilege to meet the president a couple different occasions and have some conversation. What a genuine, charismatic man, incredibly endearing in those conversations. But, I also started to realize, man, people who are good at politics, that's kind of how they come off, right? They're to your face. They really come off as super interested in what you have to say, really appreciate your perspective, really want to hear more, love to stay connected. And yet you walk out the door and you're wondering, man, are they rolling their eyes? Or they're kind of just like, okay, done with that. Let's move on to the next political meeting. What was your perspective? Did you grow more cynical after being in the White House or less?
Yeah, so I don't really view it on a scale of like cynicism. So the president, a few things about the president. First is he was just extremely well prepared for every meeting I had with him, every meeting that he was a part of that I helped coordinate. He knew the briefing materials better than I did, even when I wrote them. He was someone who, even if you disagree with his decisions, the American people could be confident that he was doing his homework, that he was invested in the decisions that he was making, and that meant a great deal. And then the other sort of thing that sticks out to me is his commitment to not just his family, but the environment he built at the White House that was conducive to family life in general. And that was just a value that came from the top. And so it meant something to staff, and that was really important. Part of the reason why I write the book as a personal narrative is because I want the reader to be able to follow what I saw and sort of learn the lessons as I learn them. And so I spend a lot of time looking at presidential rhetoric and sort of how the president talked about faith, not just so that so the reader gets to understand the president himself, but so the reader gets an understanding of how faith is employed in politics, so that we're better equipped to sort of interpret how politicians use and employ faith in the future. And that's not really a matter of sort of cynicism or optimism or whatever. What it is we need to be educated. We need to understand that politics has its incentive structure just like any other sector of life. And if we're going to engage in politics, which politics is kind of a unique thing, we don't all have sort of a obligation to know about engineering or know about different fields. We all have an obligation to know about politics because civic involvement is part of the social contract in this country. And so if we're going to be involved in politics, we need to educate ourselves on how politics operates. And that's a big hope that I have for the book, that even if no matter where you stand on the president, that reading the book will help you understand how politics operates in a clear way.
And in that way, it meets a huge need, I think, for millennials, from one millennial yourself to others. You're saying, look, politics matters. And it reminds me of reading Thomas Jefferson's biography, where he actually states that, look, you can't have a proper understanding of America if you don't understand politics. Like, this country runs on politics. And for some evangelicals and younger Christians, they're pretty much political, the avoidance, because they've seen politics mire the Christian brand, or specifically the evangelical brand. And they've seen it get so intertwined. It was one of the things David Kinnaman and I reported on a decade ago in the book Unchristian, was that 75% of the next generation said, look, Christians are too political. They're too aligned with political agendas. And I think a lot of people have reacted and just gone away from that. And yet here you are as this example who says, no, look, politics is part of our life. It's part of the culture. It's part of how you get things done in the world. And we have to show up there too, and we have to be faithful. And I think your book really starts to demonstrate, through a lot of wonderful stories, by the way, how to do that and how to do it well. And I would encourage people to get this book. Reclaiming Hope is such an important book that I think over this next 4 years, as people, gear up for the next presidential election, I think people are a little tired right now. I think they're worn out. I think there's a frustration in general with the political life in America. We know that so many people are frustrated with how this last political season went, the campaigns and so on and so forth, their displeasure with how Congress works. So there's a lot of people just saying, look, I'm a little tired of it. I would encourage you, though, this book will be a book that helps you kind of reset and say, okay, how am I going to think about this next season, and how am I going to be a little better prepared of how I can engage, how I can really understand the complexities. And that's something you do brilliantly in this book, is help people understand how complex some of these decisions are when it gets to that policy level where you're basically, in politics and in government, you're trying to create the most, what's the best imperfect policy I can choose that benefits the most people. It's not a perfect business. A lot of negotiation and compromise. But I wanted to ask you about, the recent Atlantic article where you were interviewed, and I thought it was really insightful coming out of this last election, where you, as a Democrat, somebody who's at least worked on the last two presidential campaigns prior to this one with President Obama, essentially said Democrats have a religion problem. That was the headline. And you were offering some of your own insights as you look back at this most recent election campaign to say, hey, I have some insights maybe. I've learned a few things from 2 years of campaigning on behalf of Democrats to people of religion. And I'd love for you to just share with us, like, what is your essential sentiment as you look at the last campaign cycle, specifically for Hillary Clinton and their outreach to evangelicals, which just didn't seem like it was there. You're kind of calling out your own party on this in a way that I think you hope that they would improve on that. So share with us a little bit about what you think on that.
Yeah, there are Democrats who are always waiting for the opportunity to not do faith outreach, to not have to concern themselves with that which concerns religious people, with evangelicals, with Catholics of diverse backgrounds. And unfortunately, Democrats made that miscalculation once again. They thought that Trump was a flawed candidate who could not win. And so they wanted to sort of concretize and sort of make further advances on sort of their agenda in a way that, like you said, it wasn't just that they had a bad message to evangelicals or, there were some policy disagreements that folks couldn't get over. The Clinton campaign didn't even show up. And they moved for the first time in 40 years, the Democratic Party platform called for the federal funding of abortion, which is unprecedented. A party platform has never called for that. And it was just earlier in this decade when the Democratic Party platform expressed explicitly openness to those who disagree on even the legality of abortion. And now in 2016, they viewed Donald Trump as an opportunity to push their abortion argument further than they ever had before. And so my argument is, simply that Democrats have to show up. That if Democrats are not willing to concede on issues like abortion, they have to be in conversation with those who disagree with them, because that's what it means to lead. That's what it means to be a part of a pluralistic country. Not that you concede everything that you believe, but that you're in conversation with those who disagree with you. And then I asked the Democratic Party to determine if they really want to make it a core democratic value that abortion is not only should be legal, but that it should be valued as a public moral good, which is what funding it through taxpayer dollars signifies. That is a new argument for the Democratic Party. And so the future of the Democratic Party is up for grabs right now. And even if we had won the presidential election, we still would have not had Congress. And so Democrats really are trying to paper over some of these flaws in our party. But what I'm trying to say is, look, if you're really committed to democratic principles, then losing presidential elections and losing congressional elections is not the way to advance them.
And I think, Michael, I would imagine your phone's ringing off the hook following this last election as people are waking up, realizing how much damage has been done to not reach out to people in the faith community or include their perspective in some of their platforms. And from my recollection, 2008, when you were in that post, you and Joshua, that was the most aggressive outreach I'd ever seen, where you guys were in almost every place. There were evangelicals and Christians who were thinking about these things. You guys were showing up, and that took a lot of work, a lot of effort, and from a political perspective, clearly paid off in that campaign. In closing, I just want to read something from the Publishers Weekly Starred Review, which for authors, this is very sought after. A starred review means Publishers Weekly, who evaluates every book that comes out, has basically said this is one of the top books right now that you should take a look at and you should read. But they describe the book, I think, really well. They say this is not a political tell-all. Instead, Michael Weir's book provides clear, actionable ways to rethink political engagement within the frame of fostering healthy religious communities. Folks, that's what Michael brings to this conversation and the book brings. And if you follow him on Twitter at Michael R. Weir, you'll see this in his perspective as he understands, as a Christian himself, how we ought to think about some of these things theologically, and is able to apply it through this lens about politics and the new public square that many Christians are still trying to figure out. So I hope you'll pick up the book, order it this week. It just launched, and it's a good time to sort of get this on your shelf and make sure you have a go-to resource as you think about the future of politics and what it's going to look like to change the narrative. I think this is going to be a big help. Michael, thank you for being with us today.
It's great to be with you. Thanks, Gabe.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Michael and got to know him just a little bit. What a great guy. He's part of our Q conversations that we have every year at the Q conference. It's something I'd love to invite you to, taking place April 26th through 28th in Nashville. Just 3 months away. People like Michael will be part of panels. They'll be part of the conversation around how does our faith show up in every area of society. And I hope as you go into this week and into this weekend and just reflect on our opportunity in American life, that we will be thoughtful, that we'll stay curious, that we'll advance good, that we'll recognize that politics is just one piece of this large equation. And while much will be made of politics over the next many weeks in America, and as it has over the last year, that we can't lose sight that actually most of the work that needs to be done comes down to you and I and our local communities building relationships and doing the hard work that many times goes unnoticed, isn't celebrated in the media forum, but yet is critical to rebuilding the social fabric that's going to be essential for a healthy nation, for healthy communities, and for us to be a part of doing what we believe God wants us to do as we are citizens in a state while we're passing through. So I hope you have a wonderful week and look forward to hearing and seeing you on the next edition of the Q Podcast.